Hello, my name is Kate Holterhoff. I am an analyst at RedMonk, and welcome to this MonkCast. My guest today is Evan You. He's the founder and CEO at VoidZero, and now on the open source team at Cloudflare. Evan, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
I invited Evan to join me after chatting with him at VueConf, which was conveniently in Atlanta this year. I was so jazzed to have him come on and just kind of talk Vue with me, talk frameworks, things like that. Little did I know that he was going to have this tremendous news coming out. So I want to begin by just saying huge congrats to the entire VoidZero team on the acquisition. You know, lots of interesting projects are coming out of Cloudflare. So Evan, way to go. This is exciting. Thank
you. Yeah, everyone on the team is also excited. So yeah, I think we joined at a pretty good time.
It's remarkable. Yeah, no, too cool. I've read all the blog posts that I could find on the subject, so I'm hoping we can dig into some of the details here today. But for folks who are maybe less familiar with the front end community, with what you do, could you just introduce maybe your background and what it is that VoidZero does?
Sure. So I've been working in open source since like 2013, 14. So I was still at Google at that time, and I started Vue.js as my side project. So Vue.js is a front-end JavaScript framework. So I worked on that. And in 2016, I started doing open source full-time as an independent developer. So that's like purely based on sponsorships and some, partnerships with people who are making content on top of Vue.js and, collaborating with people selling products to, developers, and they would sponsor the project or have different kind of, small partnerships, and which made it actually sustainable for me to just work on it full time for almost a decade, actually. Right. So in 2020, I created another project called Vite, which is a JavaScript build tool. And it got quite popular. So in 2023, I started a company called VoidZero, essentially trying to leverage the momentum and ecosystem around Vite and to expand that and build a full toolchain for JavaScript development. And yeah, the rest is what happened recently. VoidZero was acquired by Cloudflare, and now the whole team has joined. Yeah.
That is a clear and succinct history. I appreciate that. I think it's valuable because many folks may have heard of the acquisition and be less familiar with the breadth of experience that Cloudflare is now bringing in. And so I guess just worth noting, I invited you on here before you were an employee of Cloudflare. So you're here on your own auspices. This is you did this to yourself, Evan, is what I'm saying. This is okay. All right. So exciting. I think many folks in the front-end community, when they hear about this sort of an acquisition, they get a little nervous. And I feel like you addressed this very well in the blog post. But could you help us to understand, like, what is it that this is going to mean for the Vue community, the Vite community? How are things going to be changing from their perspective?
So first of all, for Vue, right? I also talked about this on X. So Vue is not part of the acquisition. Actually, Vue has never been associated with VoidZero in the first place. This is also a kind of a common thing I had to explain over and over again when I started the company. People are like, what does Vue get out of VoidZero? And I'm like, well, they are separate, right? Which is intentional. Vue is an independent project. It's still my project, but I intentionally have a very clear boundary between Vue and VoidZero, the company, right? So, for example, the IP of, on the IP aspect, I actually signed the part of my IP of Vite into the company. But Vue has always stayed out of this whole thing. And similarly, in the acquisition, Vue was just never part of it. Actually, I have an explicit clause in my employment contract which says Vue is prior art, and it has nothing to do with my employment at Cloudflare at all.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that I've already been really intentional in keeping the sort of independence of Vue because in a way it's a special project to me, right? And also my intention with VoidZero in the very beginning is to say, okay, this is going to be a company. This is going to be, we're going to raise VC money, right? We're potentially going to sell it to other companies in the future, right? So I know
Hmm.
this is potentially going to happen down the road. So which is why I always kind of was really careful in not dragging Vue into it. In a way, I like having the ability to sort of operate Vue in its own capacity without having to worry about, having other stakeholders trying to get a piece out of it. You know?
Yeah. Okay. What a unique situation too, because like we've had Daniel Rowe on the podcast talking about when Nuxt was acquired by Vercel. I've talked to
Mm-hmm.
folks on the React Foundation team. Seth Webster's come on. So I feel like there's always this sort of nuance with these acquisitions.
Yeah.
But yours is so unique because you have so many important infrastructure and community type projects that you're
Mm-hmm.
balancing here. So I can imagine that the lawyers were having a hard time with that. And yeah, and when we talked at VueConf, you gave a great talk. It was like a an hour long sort of discussion of where does AI fit into this, like what is the future of Vite, all these things, and a lot of benchmarks in there, and of course all the different projects. But one of my takeaways too is that how much you had built that was working with the Cloudflare ecosystem. So this feels like a
Mm-hmm.
very natural fit. So maybe I should have anticipated this. I am an analyst after all. So I guess you mentioned thinking about it between 2024. How long have you been considering Cloudflare as like the best home for this?
Specific for the acquisition, it's not too long ago. I
Okay.
guess the initial idea started when I was at Cloudflare Connect in
All
October
right.
2025. Um, so I think that also was around the time we announced our Series A. But these like funding announcements is always a bit delayed. We actually closed our
Yeah.
Series A earlier in the year. And I was at Cloudflare Connect because I think one of the things is Vite has always been this sort of entry point for web development, right? People start building apps with Vite, and then, but for a very long time, people also think about Vite as just this like front end build tool. Like, they can use React or Vue or some other frameworks with it, and they produce some static assets, and that's it, right? When you think about full stack development, how do you get into the back end? Usually, it involves another framework, right? So there are a lot of frameworks being built on top of Vite. There's like Astral or Nuxt or 10 Stack Start.
Mm-hmm.
But traditionally, people can always, I guess, before these Vite-based frameworks got more mature and popular, people always kind of look to Next.js, right? And when you look at Next.js, naturally, there's this Vercel sort of story where Next.js helped Vercel get off the ground and get all the users. So from my perspective, like when we were working at VoidZero, we've obviously tried really hard to see if there is a way to just monetize on top of the tooling itself. But as you can imagine, that's actually really hard. Um, so down the road, we've always been thought, okay, like, eventually we may have to go into just thinking about how we can leverage Vite and build something that's tied into the server compartments, right? Because like monetizing on tooling or front end alone is extremely difficult. But the moment
Mm-hmm.
you have a server running somewhere, right, you are running compute for people. That makes it easier for people to pay you. So I guess down the road, we always felt like if just like pure tooling based monetization doesn't really work out, we always have that route, that option. And in fact, Void, which is the project we kind of launched right before the acquisition, uh, is our exact attempt at that. So we've been thinking about potentially going into a cloud offering. Um, I guess like for a very long time. One of the reasons we didn't do it is because we just had so much work to do before that. And also we were kind of trying to see if, just the ecosystem, how does it mature? Um, Obviously, I've been doing a lot of research on my own and just thinking about if I were to build a full stack solution that's kind of serves as an extension of Vite, right? What it would look like and where should it run? Um, in a way, then it ties into the question of like where should it run, and usually people would say, okay, it needs to run everywhere. You need to be vendor agnostic,
Right.
which makes sense for a tool like Vite, right? But at the same time, I think the thing with vendor agnostic solutions is that you are always constrained by the lowest common denominator, because the same thing needs to work everywhere, which means like if a platform offers something pretty unique, but you cannot replicate it on other vendors, then you can't support it, right? Which is a pity. So, and unfortunately, no one has really explored that, right? So when I look at Cloudflare, I've always, then for Cloudflare specific, I've always been like a fan of the primitives they're offering. Uh, you know, it's very effortlessly scaling globally. And they added over the years, they've added D1, R2, KV, a lot of the primitives you typically need for an application. But if you've used Cloudflare, you probably know that the experience of stitching these things together and get your code to actually run on Cloudflare hasn't always been a super smooth experience, right? So I just saw the sort of, it's a space I'm interested in. It's also I see some sort of opportunity where we can potentially leverage Vite's power to make that experience smoother. And we've already had some collaboration with Cloudflare prior to the acquisition as well, um, because because like I said, Cloudflare is a pretty unique runtime. It has a lot of its own quirks, and when people try to do local development, they don't have the actual Cloudflare system running locally, right? So it's very different from, say, if you're deploying to a pure Node.js hosting platform. You're running Node.js locally. You're also running Node.js on the server. So you expect your code to behave exactly the same, but that is not the case for Cloudflare for a very long time, right? Like maybe a few years ago, if you were to deploy it to Cloudflare, you'd actually be running your code locally in Node.js, and then the deployed code runs in Cloudflare workers. And there are different
Mm.
runtimes. There are a lot of behavior differences that's just not consistent. And you only find out after you deploy. That is not ideal at all, right? Um, so what we kind of worked with Cloudflare on was this thing called Environment API in Vite. It's in a set of API that allows you to basically take the user's code, even if the user is starting their local development process in Node.js, which is Vite runs in by default. Vite can actually take their code and then put it inside a different runtime, which is, for example, Cloudflare's runtime. It's called worker D, right? So we can take the user's code, transform it through Vite's pipeline, bundle it on the fly, and make it run in worker D locally on the user's machines. Now the behavior will be consistent between the local development process and the deployed version that runs actually on Cloudflare. So that kind of solves a big gap in the development experience for Cloudflare, and that's also part of where the synergy came from. As Cloudflare saw like, okay, Vite can actually help us solve this problem, and for me, I was just like looking at like, hey, we can solve a lot of problems Cloudflare has. We can also give Vite a natural sort of step up. Like for a Vite user, they can now say, I want to build a full stack application. I can just do things like this and it just run on Cloudflare without having to go through all the extra trouble. So I started I guess like we didn't like explicitly talk about this until I came out with Void, right? So
Hmm.
there has been a bit of interest on both sides when we talked at Cloudflare Connect in October, right? But it wasn't like, hey, let's just like start this whole like acquisition thing. It was more
Yeah.
like there could be more opportunities for collaboration here. And I think when Void came out, it just became super obvious that the synergy is just like on our side, we have, built this thing on Cloudflare that shows them, hey, like there are great things that can be done here. And on Cloudflare side, they've always been thinking of Vite as this thing that A, help them with local DX a lot, and B, can potentially bring more users onto Cloudflare.
Yeah. Um, I appreciate that you have brought in that the subject of like how Cloudflare is going to be leveraging Vite, because when I read that press release, I assumed it was going to be more like, oh no, we're just we're adding this to our our portfolio here, and that this is going to be more like benefiting you, that you'll take advantage of all Cloudflare's resources. But no, it comes across very clearly what you're saying, that they're going to be building on top of Vite in these significant ways. And it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of how Anthropic has when they acquired Bun, just in
Hmm.
the sense of like, these are open source projects, but there's something to bringing that team in-house, having the skill set on hand, and also just that deep knowledge of like how to leverage these tools and to take advantage of them to their fullest. So I mean, it speaks a lot to maybe Cloudflare's own strategies and what they're looking at in the future. I mean, needless to say, AI takes up a big part of their announcement as well. So
Yep.
yeah, there was a lot of takeaways there. I don't know. Did you want to respond to any of that before I move on?
Yeah, I guess ties back. I want to talk a bit about like companies
Yeah.
acquiring open source, right? It's like there's always this concern about like, will this thing stay neutral? Will this thing stay free? I
Mm-hmm.
think I do want to emphasize Cloudflare has made very, very serious commitments here to ensure that,
Right.
like we obviously, the purpose of the acquisition is to, leverage Vite and try to get more people to use Cloudflare, right? That makes total
Yeah.
sense. But we want to do it in a way that does not distort the incentives uh, of the project itself, right? The goal of the project is still to be the best tool possible, right? And in order to get people onto Cloudflare, we do that by keep making Vite great and just making the specific part of Vite and Cloudflare integration smoother than before. But we should not do it at the expense of making it worse for the other platforms. So that
Mm-hmm.
is super important for us because in order to keep Vite great and keep people trusting Vite, we need to keep it, usable and beneficial to everyone else, even if they're not using Cloudflare.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And but before we move on from the monetization issue, because obviously that's really important here. I'm interested. Did you consider any other business models before you moved into thinking through acquisition? For instance, having a sort of mixed licensing mode, or the Void deployment platform.
Hmm.
How serious were you with those initiatives before deciding that acquisition was the way to go?
Um, it was obviously very serious. We
Okay.
are a VC funded company after all, and
Right.
we were under pressure to find a actual business model. So V Plus was the original thing that we were trying to see if the mixed licensing model. So for context, we built this thing called V Plus, which is essentially a combined unified tool that combines Vite, VTest, Rolldown, OXC, all the things that we've worked on and
Mm-hmm.
more, right? It contains something that's unique to V Plus itself. For example, we have the task runner system with automatic inferred caching based on file access. We have it bakes in Node.js version management and patch manager management. So it's almost a one-stop shop for your whole JavaScript, TypeScript development workflows. And we think that actually we're still pretty, confident that it's probably the best thing for your agent to use when it comes to TypeScript development. And we thought it would be valuable enough so that we could the license model we tried, it's kind of interesting because we made it free for most individual users, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the license model we tried is companies above a certain revenue threshold would have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. So we were testing the waters with what that threshold should be, and we got a very long list of companies interested in it. We actually got to, you know, conversations of people actually are like, "Hey, we want to actually just pay for this so we can use it. Like, what is,
Right.
what exactly? How much do we pay you?" Um, and got into those conversations, but when we got into the actual details of like what they actually want, they started asking about support and they started asking about like how many hours of support do we get each month, and if we run into issues, who do we talk to? And we realized, I guess, the expectation with selling software like this is because um, it's not like a hosted service where as long as things keep running, people are happy. uh, Using
Yeah.
tooling is, inevitably they will run into all kinds of issues. It's kind of like we already get a lot of GitHub issues. We already get a lot of bug reports. And now, once they become paying customers, we kind of have to prioritize this. And we have to have people just on Slack sitting all day answering questions pretty much. And we have to build a whole support team. Um, and we realize like the scalability of this isn't ideal because we don't want to turn into a support, company. Like, I mean, no disrespect to Red Hat, but like we don't want to have a team of, like 50, so our core team is just like fewer than 20 people, but we don't want to have to build another like 50 people solution engineer team just to answer questions all day. That is just
Mm-hmm.
not the business I sign up for. Um, so we started thinking about Void. Like I said, selling hosting has always been the kind of thing like we know we can do if we really want to, right? The reason we didn't get it into too early is like we're like, let's explore what we can do with B plus. And quickly we realized, okay, like it's not the thing we really want to do, right? Because in building a company, it's always kind of tough balancing like, you know, how do you actually make money and what are you really trying to achieve? And I think in a way, having good investors is nice in that way because our investors really didn't like pressure us so much in like they were not short-sighted
Wow.
enough to force us to just like you need to
Yeah.
actually start having revenue like by year 2 or something, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so we got the opportunity to try things and then we got the opportunity to explore what we can do with Void. And for Voice specifically, I guess it definitely helped the acquisition conversation, because it just made things so obvious. Uh, but we realized, so for Void specifically, it's a whole. The reason we didn't get into hosting too early is because hosting is a whole domain of its own, right? Like once
Right.
you get into the hosting business, there's this whole new category things like how do you design billing? How do some companies may want SLAs, you get through like all the security, data retention, a lot of problems that we did not have to deal with before, and now we have to deal with it, right? So as we are sort of still in the private beta phase of Void, we started to actually working on these problems. And we're like, well, this probably is going to take quite a bit longer than we hoped before we can actually say this is production ready and start making real revenue from it. Um, but then again, in some way, it's great that we can build this thing and eventually make money. But also, like, we feel like a lot of our passion is in the tooling itself. Uh, and now we have this whole hosting platform thing, and we need to hire more people to work on hosting. I have to split my attention between tooling and
Right.
hosting. Um, it's, deep down, we're like, we wish we could just keep focused on tooling, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
acquisition actually just gave us that opportunity because, look, we're building on top of Cloudflare. Cloudflare is already offering hosting. It's like compute, it's a cloud platform, right? And the cloud platform wants to support us, and we can keep working on tooling, and our tooling will benefit the cloud platform. It's basically, allows us to kind of skip that phase and directly jump into what we actually want to do.
Okay, well, let's stay on that subject of like deployment vendors, like these cloud platforms. So Cloudflare obviously fits in that category, but some other ones include, Vercel, Netlify, there's many others.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it is no secret that Cloudflare and Vercel have had a little beef.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm thinking back on Connect, I remember Sunil Pai showed me a blog post where there was some static going on there. So no need to be quoting tweets here, but we're all familiar. I know you're chronically online, Evan. So talk to me about how the community should feel about that, especially folks who maybe use Vercel. Like, should folks who use projects like Nuxt and Svelte, should they be concerned at all about support for
Mm-hmm.
Vite or any of the VoidZero products?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, I think the beef is it's just like it's a social media thing.
Okay, fair enough.
Like I'm pretty sure like they are to some people it's on a personal level, but I think at the business level, obviously they are competing businesses, right? They are trying to compete for the same sort of positioning as like the cloud for agents, the cloud for the future of web deployments. Um, which I think there is. So I think there are basically three parts. A, there's this like personal beef stuff, which I don't think matters in the grand scheme of things. Uh,
Sure.
and then there's the actual business competition, which I think is what it is, right? Companies
Hmm.
gotta do business, and then
Right.
there's the people who are actually working on these things, right?
Ah,
Which is very different from the beef people are perceiving. Actually, the people who joined Vercel as part of the Nux acquisition. In fact, one of the Vue core team members, Eduardo, who's probably one of the oldest members of the Vue team. I've been personally
wow.
sponsoring him for over all these years, and he just recently joined Vercel, and he's actually really happy about it. And he's like, "You can stop sponsoring me now because I get paid pretty well by Vercel,
Yeah.
and I can still, spend some spare time working on Vue, which is great." So I'm still good friends with the people on the Nux team with Eduardo. There's really nothing that changes the dynamics of which is also a perk of me keeping Vue independent, is we can still keep collaborating on these things on the side. It doesn't really get affected by how, some high level people in these companies kind of hate each other. It doesn't really affect us, right? Um,
Well put.
yeah, and I
Okay.
think it's also like even at the open source parts, I think generally people working even on the in these two companies, even they're working on competing products, they have a lot of respect for each other, right? Because it's just a matter of fact that Vercel is shipping a lot of great open source, and Cloudflare is shipping a lot of great infra products, and there are things we can
Yeah.
learn from each other, right? Um, and we have people who previously worked at Vercel now work at Cloudflare, and vice versa. So there's a lot of cross pollination, and I think for the users, I generally think it's actually better that there are companies, competent companies competing in this space. It's kind of like, similar to how I think the AI space would be worse off if Anthropic and OpenAI were not competing, right? Because it's the competition that forces them to kind of just keeping up the pace and trying to one up each other. And I think it's similarly, in the web development space, in the agent hosting space, you gotta have competition to have people just keep innovating and coming out great ideas and better implementations, and users end up benefiting because, you know, uh, because like having choices also forces these companies to avoid doing, blatant vendor locking. Because if you do that,
Hmm.
people see that and people are not stupid. They will be like, "Oh, if you want to lock me in, I'm just not gonna be using you for in the first
Yeah.
place, right?" So I think overall, this kind of competition just benefits end users.
Yeah, and as part of that, I know that the press release talks about this $1 million independent fund as part of the pledge to neutrality. Do you have any
Mhm.
insight into who's going to be seeing any of that money? Because divided by all the maintainers isn't going to be much, but it's a nice gesture.
Yeah, we actually already have part of the deal considerations flowing to some of the long-term contributors because we
Oh,
actually
nice.
granted some of the contributors some options in VoidZero. Uh, so they
Oh,
already, there are already some money flowing there, and this 1 million actually is like extra on top of it. And this is gonna
okay.
be openly administrated by the Vite core team. So Beat Core
Okay.
team consists of me and Safi, who is a VoidZero employee, but there are also four other people who are not part of VoidZero or Cloudflare. Right. So it's going to be just this like very uh kind of open ledger thing. If we were to disperse the money, it's going to be just like public records, who gets what, you know.
Okay. Is it an ongoing fund? Is there going to be like $1 million every year? It's just like this is the
Right
payout
now,
as
it's
like
a
a
one time.
okay.
It'll probably take some work, like for us to like even make use of this properly.
All right.
So yeah. So Matthias, who is probably the one of the he is actually the first person I got onto the Vite team, and he's
Wow.
been with us through all this time. So he's our community person. He is just like the helped us get things off the ground, talk to all the people, making sure they're aligned. He knows everyone, and he is
Yeah.
also really well respected. So we're gonna, I trust him in just making good use of this. Obviously, I'm going to be sort of involved in the process to say this looks good, but uh,
Hmm.
I kind of want to I don't want to be the person to say you get this much, you get that much, right? This has to be sort of a team-based decision.
Okay. Okay. So let's take a step back maybe and talk about the lessons from this experience because Astro joined Cloudflare, what's it, earlier this year, now
Yep.
Vite. So what sort of advice would you give to folks that are maintainers or that have built these projects that are open source and are maybe struggling with the monetization issue that you've struggled with? What sort of advice would you give them? And frankly, just like from the state of software today,
Hmm.
what would you say we've learned? Like, what is it viable to have standalone open source infrastructure in 2026 without being absorbed into these like infra giants? Is that really the only end game possible? Like, and maybe have things even shifted? Is that how it's always been? Like, this was always, this has always been a problem. I don't know. So yeah, lessons that you would share with folks who are in similar situations, and like, where are we today?
Hmm. That's a sharp question. And so I think for this question, there are two different ways to think about it, right?
Okay.
So I kind of have experienced to both sides of it, right? I still keep Vue independent, and Vue is sustainable,
Mm-hmm.
even without the acquisition money that I personally. So now after the acquisition, I'm planning to personally kind of, put a bit more to support other people working on Vue. But even without that, Vue has always been sustainable. Like we have Open
Mm.
Collective, we have GitHub sponsors, we have historically we had a bigger Patreon sort of income, but like it's much smaller now. But there's still something going on that we allow us to support maybe two full-time people actually just working on Vue and nothing else. Um, but Vue has historically even like so Vue given Vue's usage scale, right? It's downloaded like I don't know, like close to 10 million times a week now. So it's like the second most popular JavaScript framework in the world.
Wow.
But the amount of sponsorship we get, it's sustainable, but it's definitely not not substantial by any means compared to the scale of impact it has created, right? So um but even that, Vue has been an outlier for independent open source. I've seen
Mm.
many projects like Babel, uh, which has been critical in the JavaScript ecosystem. It has historically always struggled with funding. And then we have, so if you are running an open source project purely out of your passion, nowadays I think it is actually really difficult, right? Um, Before I started VoidZero, people have always come to me to say, "Hey, how can I make my open source project as sustainable as Vue?" I always feel like, the thing I do with Vue is very hard to replicate because every open source project is different. It's kind of like every startup is different. You got to find your own way of monetization, your own way of, you know, your own business model. And open source is similar. Uh, Vue is unique in the sense that it has a big reach. It is a JavaScript framework. People interact with the documentation a lot. It has great exposure to end developers, right? But if you're a more tooling infrastructure layer thing, like, for example, Vite, right? Vite actually quickly has more download numbers than Vue does, but like Vite's sponsorship numbers has always been lower than Vue's because it just, when people use Vite, they treat it as a tool. They install it, they get it configured, they get it working, and they forget about it, right? They love it when it works, but once it starts working, they don't think about it as much. Unlike a framework, when they write code every day, they would look at the docs and they have deeper engagement, and then the sponsorships become more meaningful. Uh, so companies are more likely to sponsor frameworks compared to tools. Right. So there are a lot
Hmm.
of these intricacies between different kind of open source projects. So it's very hard to give people very generic advice on how to monetize your
Yeah.
open source. Right. So on the other hand, we also see a lot of you know, open source with different like motives, right? There are open source projects where you start just because you want to do it. Like I started Vue and Vite just because I want to do these things. I didn't really think about commercialization or monetization when I started these projects. So it's more like passion driven. And then I try to figure things out along the way, right? Uh, the way Vue sponsorship model works, like it just organically evolved. I didn't really try to force it into that way or try to like design it from that way in the beginning. But then we also see there are a lot of companies or startups nowadays where they're doing open source, right? But open source is only part of the whole commercialization strategy. It's a means to an end. The whole idea is to build a successful business, and open source is just a strategy that they happen to
Right.
pick to help them achieve that goal. Right. So I think the incentives is very different. So I would say the first category, the passion driven ones, it's getting harder and harder. Right. Um, Especially with AI, because the thing is the cost of like you no longer get the same level of um the joy of craft when you work on these new ideas. So when I worked on Vue, I would keep polishing these little details over weeks, months, uh, and I was happy just working on it because it gave me this sense of like sort of I'm doing something that's really great, I'm proud of. But I think AI nowadays sort of it kind of takes away some of that joy because it's so easy to just come up with an idea and like type a prompt and you get something working in like 20 minutes.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
it, and the idea is also much easier to copy because like you can open source something and the next day someone would fork it with AI and add a bunch of features and say, I made a better clone of your stuff. So yeah, it's tough. I think I don't really know what to make of it at this point because like if you're just starting out a new passion driven open source project, I think like it's definitely tougher than what we got back then. Uh, and monetization would even become more of a challenge. And even with commercial open source, there's been this kind of like, you know, uh, there are companies who are just closing off issues because people are sending spam PRs with AI. And there are people just went straight to closed source because they're worried about people just forking their thing with AI and just like become a competitor overnight. So the dynamics is changing, um, and there are definitely a lot of new problems we need to think of when it comes to the interaction between AI and open source. And honestly, I don't have clear ideas or answers to these yet. I'm concerned. But at the same time, I think what I do want to encourage people to do is to still keep the open source sort of etiquette or just like be good actors in the space, right? Still sort of respect what original ideas that people come up with. Don't just like take people's stuff and fork it just because you can with AI, right? Try to collaborate. Try to still like be pull your efforts together to make great things together rather than like everyone can just do their own version because AI is going to write all the code. I don't that's not the future I want to see.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, on that note, I got to bring up, Cloudflare is actually, I wouldn't say notorious, but they have a history now of what creating vibe coded versions of front end things. Like, so they just did most recently a WordPress clone as well as a Next clone. So
Uh-huh.
was there a part of you that was worried they were going to do a Vite clone?
Not really. I think the next one is controversial, but there's been a long history of people wanting to deploy Next.js on Cloudflare and running into all sorts of issues. And
Hmm.
in a way, I think the VNext thing is really just came out of the frustration in trying to support all the edge cases, like people trying to run Next.js on Cloudflare. And there were because the fork on VNext is actually Next running on Vite. Uh, and it runs much better on
Oh,
Cloudflare because it's based on Vite.
there
So
you go.
that's the actual reason. It's not like forking just because they hate each other, to be honest. Uh,
Yeah.
so there are technical reasons why they try to do it. Um, and VNest is in fact also used in a pretty prominent project. Uh, that's actually OpenAI sites, as far as I know, is deployed on Cloudflare and running on VNext. Um,
Well, I didn't know that. That is interesting. It seemed like a
yeah.
hobby project, kind of like a like a cool look what we did. I didn't
Hmm.
realize anyone had actually deployed it because I think it was TJ Van Tol, who is on his own podcast, the Front End Fire one, was actually
Hmm.
talking about trying to use it as a drop-in replacement, and because there's no like documentation, or there wasn't, I don't know
Hmm.
what it looks like today. He wasn't able to get it working. Now, I don't know how much time he spent on it. Maybe, I'm sure there's extenuating circumstances here, but this is the first time I've heard of it actually being used. So this is
Yeah.
a good
The
proof
use
point. This is
case, yeah.
interesting.
There are a lot of different use cases for these things, right? Because I honestly wouldn't recommend people trying to say take an existing production level Next.js app and try to migrate it over. There's
Yeah,
really little point in doing that. I think the idea is you can quickly spin up new
I
projects
see.
that's still using Next.js style code, right? But make sure that it can actually run smoothly on Cloudflare without problems. That I think that is the main incentive. Um, Steve, if you see this, correct me if I'm wrong. Steve is the one who worked on these things. Um, and yeah, and I think the in a lot of ways, M dash isn't even a fork in a sense. I personally do think the whole there are a lot of like permanent communication around these around VNext and M dash can be improved.
Yeah,
Like I've actually talked to Dane about this. I think like we acknowledge there are definitely like certain ways we can communicate these things better. Like for example, for M dash, it's not even a fork per se. It's like it's written in a completely
oh,
different language. It does the same functionality, but it's not like it's not like they took the PHP code base and tell the AI to say, hey, like rewrite this in TypeScript. Uh, it's a pretty different code base. It just does the same thing that WordPress does. Um, and in a way, I don't know if like calling it the spiritual successor of WordPress really helped because like, obviously a lot of people took issue with that. So
yeah.
yeah, and honestly, I'm not too involved with that project, so I probably should reserve my comments here. Uh, so I only know enough about the technical implementation of it to know that it's not just a slop fork. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. I won't force
yeah.
you to speculate on what's going on there, but it obviously got a lot of press, and I think it just also signals something about what Cloudflare, their strategic approach to front end, top of the stack technologies. I mean, it's been interesting to follow that because I think it kind of is a little surprising when we think about what Cloudflare uh, was known for in the past, to be CDNs, things like that,
Mhm.
more
Yeah.
infrastructure level. I mean, actually, as a former front end engineer, I love it. I'm like, well, look how important we are. This is it. Everybody knows we're all paying attention
Hmm.
to the front end now. This is where the cool stuff is happening. But of course, Evan, you've always known that, so I don't have to tell you. Okay, so I want to hear a little bit about your thoughts on the open source situation, because that was one of the things that we discussed actually at VueConf. So
Hmm.
talk to me about your overarching thoughts on the state of foundations today, because Vue is famously independent.
Hmm.
I've heard it characterized as a benevolent dictatorship, as many great open source projects are, right? Have you considered putting Vue into a foundation? I mean, now seems like kind of a pivotal point. You said it was written into your contract that it's independent. Many folks have reservations about foundations, understandably. I guess I'm just interested in where do you sit on the foundation question?
Yeah. Yes, we've been asked whether we want to put Vue into a foundation. I guess I just really didn't see the benefit back then,
Okay.
or still don't really quite see the full benefit of it. Part of it is because there are two types of situations where I see projects going into foundations. A is the project is so big, so critical, right? People put it in a foundation with many big companies backing it, and they're like, "This is too important to be left alone, so we gotta just like support it all together," which is like Linux
Yeah.
or React. So, but like I guess like for Vue, for a very long time, it's just like in this sort of like limbo where it's kind of big enough where it's like people kind of think, oh, it deserves a good sort of sustainability model, or like people, we need to take care of it. But it's also not big enough for multiple big companies to say, hey, we need to put money into this foundation to keep Vue going. There just isn't such incentives. So, and if we want to get enough companies to be interested in this, that's going to be a lot of work on itself. But uh and for me personally, it has been sustainable already, right? So we just didn't feel the urge to go out of our way to like build up the foundation, then try to like pitch all these companies to pull money into it. uh so it just didn't really make sense for us.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal take on foundations, I guess like I don't want to be I guess historically, I just don't really get how, like, what actually foundation would help for a project like Vue specifically. I can only speak from my own experience, right? Uh, for some other projects, maybe they're not as sustainable as Vue on themselves. It definitely helps for them to just look for a home where they can be like, hey, take care of this. But for Vue, it's like when we were asked, do you want to join a foundation? I'm like, what do we get out of it? And they're like, IP protection will help with this and that. But a lot of that for us is just sort of, I guess, not critical. And yeah, I just, through those conversations, I just never really found convincing reasons for us to say we should put Vue in a foundation. Um, and I think even after this, I also thought
Yeah.
about setting up a foundation myself, uh, so that it could be, I actually thought about this, right? I looked into how to do it, but like, obviously like, getting certified as 501(c)(3) is a very complicated process, and I just never had the time or energy to follow it through. Um, so what I'm doing now is kind of like we're probably going to have an entity that is still dedicated to supporting Vue, but whether it's going to be in the form of foundation or just a you know normal business, like to be honest, I just don't really think it's going to make a fundamental difference for Vue specifically at this point, as long as we can make it sustainable. Um, maybe in a few years down the road, when I really want to say I'm going to be retiring, I don't, I need someone else to take care of it. Maybe that's when the time I'll think about putting it into a foundation. But for now, I just feel like, I don't think it adds real value to Vue specifically. I can't really speak for other projects.
Okay. And then I gotta ask about some benchmarks and roll down. And
Mm.
I have done a little bit of research into some of the bundlers, and I'm curious about how you're thinking through the single page applications and how they relate to um, just, I guess, this arms race right now
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like roll down, RS Pack, Turbo Pack, all of these different bundlers. And
Mm-hmm.
what is your So I did a number of interviews as part of my research on this. I didn't get a chance to interview you, so this is my opportunity. I got to do this. So talked with Tobias Koppers, creator of Webpack and now TurboPack. Talked with Zach Jackson, who's an engineer at ByteDance. He works on the RSPack team, and so I got some spicy takes during these interviews. But both of them pointed me towards artifact size as being a big component of the reason that we have this arms race. Because at the end of the day, it's hard for engineers to even keep up, right? It's 10 times faster, it's 50 times faster, it's great. But I do think that they're changing all the time. Developers get this sort of benchmark fatigue. AI has only made it worse. And so I'm interested to hear your sense of this, because I'll say, like, Zach Jackson had maybe the spiciest take. Says that, like, but the bundler war is really about artifact size, and that's the dirty secret. I love that term, dirty secret. So do you agree with that, that it's really just about the size, or have we moved past this? Is the SPA wars, is that overblown? It's not really about JavaScript size being pulled down onto devices. Like, where do you sit on all that?
Yeah, so I agree. Like, artifact quality is actually important. And every bundler is more or less trying to balance between raw performance versus, because, like, there are two different metrics, right? One is how fast you can build your app. The other is how fast your end user loads your app, right? So for engineers working on a project, bundling performance helps the developers, because you can build and debug your app faster. You can run your CI faster. You can run your tests faster, right? There are real benefits there. But for your end users, artifact size is what determines, like, how fast your app can load, how well you can split your bundles so they get more efficient page loads. They're able to load just a fraction of the code to be able to get the page load faster. So both are important, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? So I think historically, Webpack has been this really, really powerful, extremely powerful thing, and it gives you all these knobs and levers so that you can fine tweak your artifact output so that you get the best possible, like, end user performance at the expense of being the architecture being a bit more complicated, and therefore the performance would also suffer because all the additional complexity it has to handle. So when we started with, so it could also, would also involve some other, notable solutions like ESBuild, which is made by Evan Mollis, who's the CTO of Figma. ESBuild is probably the first bundler that really kind of started this arms race when its benchmark basically showed, like, ESBuild is 100 times faster than Webpack plus Terser, which is the standard combination back then, right? So that was when, like, when that came out, people realized, okay, like, we can actually have fast bundlers, right? But it is true that the artifact quality of ESBuild is not as great as, say, Webpack plus Terser, right? Historically, ESBuild has larger bundles. The minification quality is worse, and it doesn't really have any sort of code splitting control. It only has one automatic code splitting mode, and that's it. So you can't really, like, do fine tweaking to your needs. So if you use ESBuild to bundle a large user-facing application, your user will actually have worse performance. Like, they will load your app slower, right? So that's the trade-off, right? So when we started with Vite, we initially used rollup, right? And then we started working on Rolldown, which is our own Rust implementation that is now powering Vite 8 and above. And for Rolldown, it really kind of takes time for the thing to mature, because you got to first get things working. Then you get into these deep optimizations, right? So the nice thing about Rolldown is, like, when we got the first basic functionality working, we know, okay, like, it's like 3 times faster than RSPack. And we're both written in Rust, right? So that's kind of like where, we're still more than twice as fast than RSPack nowadays. And over time, we've been adding. So the interesting thing is, in the beginning, Rolldown is indeed producing noticeably bigger bundles, and it doesn't have as a powerful sort of control over code splitting as RSPack does. It is true, right? So that's why we have been consistently trying to improve on that front. But the nice thing is we've been able to add all of these features. We've implemented better minification, we've implemented better tree shaking, we've implemented better code splitting over time without degrading the performance. So that is the important thing, right? So overall, we've been catching up in terms of artifact quality. And in fact, I think we're really, really close to RSPack nowadays. So the capability is pretty much equivalent. At the same time, RSPack has been making great improvements in terms of performance, right? So they've always been this like more feature rich because they are effectively a one-to-one port of Webpack, which has all the things that allows you to fine tweak all the things, right? So initially they started a bit slower, but they've been tweaking the performance. So they're getting a bit faster over time. So we are basically starting with this like much faster, but not as feature rich kind of starting state. And we are trying to stay as fast, but we're adding more features. And they're coming out from this like really feature rich, but slower kind of place, but they're optimizing the performance to try to catch up. So I think, at this stage, they are still slightly better in terms of like overall artifact quality. I'll give them that. But it's really, really close now. And at the same time, they've been getting faster over time, but we're still, comfortably faster. We're like still more than twice as fast than RSPack. So I think this is again a case of, healthy competition where, in fact, like 4 of our current team members came from they worked on RSPack at some point. So we have like people who were previously worked at Bandits now currently working. We're at VoidZero now, actually working at Cloudflare on Roda. So it's a lot of like people that we know each other, and we kind of have a lot of mutual respect as well.
Yeah. Okay. That's exciting. And now you're able to leverage all of the engineering talent at Cloudflare to keep working on this problem. Zach really pointed to the fact that he also mentioned Cursor and that a lot of that code doesn't run. So it sounds like there is a lot of opportunity to try to optimize and make sure that these things are, I don't know, as stripped down as possible. So, and, everything's on Rust now was like the big, I think that was like step one. Everything's on Rust or Go. And after that, it's like just these tweaks that you're mentioning. Do you find that developers are overwhelmed by all these benchmarks? And like, I feel that way, but maybe I'm projecting. Like, do you think that
we are? I think the reason we did all this work at VoidZero is to eventually try to, converge, give people a sort of like, this is, the default starting point. So you stop worrying about all the stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's still good to have choices. I think RSPack is particularly useful for people who are coming from a legacy Webpack application. And they're like, we just use all these advanced Webpack features and we can't just like easily migrate to Vite, right? So RSPack is perfect for that use case. Obviously, we believe for greenfield projects, we provide overall a better set of trade-offs, but it's good that, people using Webpack still have options to modernize their code base and get better performance.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I will say when I was doing research on this, I could find the most data from Vite, your team, and from Farm. And then there were a lot of like little, like just individual developers who had put each through their paces, kind of created their own benchmarks. So, for as many numbers as there are, trying to like track them down, I found to be a bit of a challenge. So just curious on what you're seeing.
I think nowadays these benchmarks are more or less for tooling nerds, because for end users, most of them, especially for nowadays, if you're just like vibe coding, like all these things are fast enough.
Okay. Yeah. I know. Okay. I am going to wrap us up here. I know we didn't even broach AI nearly as deeply as we could have, but we'll just have to have you back on, Evan. Okay. So before we go, where do you direct folks to follow your musings? To what's your social media channels? How can everybody keep up with what's new and exciting at VoidZero Cloudflare?
Sure. So I'm on X/Twitter. I'm just at Evan Yu, and that's my main social channel, really. I have a Chinese alt on X as well. But it's completely personal. It has nothing to do with technical stuff. But if you just want to follow for the kicks of it, you can do that.
Yeah. We love kicks. All right. Well, I have really enjoyed speaking with you today, Evan. Again, my name is Kate Holterhoff. I'm a senior analyst at RedMonk. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and review the MonkCast on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching us on RedMonk's YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and engage with us in the comments.